On Father's Day, my daughter Sophia gave her father-in-law a brand new BMW X7 worth $90,000. Me, I got handed a mortgage bill with a sticky note, reading payment overdue, handle this immediately. When I quietly asked if there might be something small for me too, her response was ice cold. You already live here for free, Dad. That's your gift. I walked out without saying a word. 3 days later, I had 94 missed calls, and my daughter had lost everything she thought she owned. Before we dive deeper, please subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything. My name is Harold Whitman, and I'm 56 years old. What I'm about to tell you will change how you think about family loyalty forever. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones systematically destroying your life. Sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself. The silence in my Prius was deafening as I drove away from what used to be my own house. My hands trembled on the steering wheel not from age, but from the crushing weight of realization. After 28 years of raising Sophia as a widowed father, after selling my beloved home to help her buy that mansion, after paying her mortgage for 9 months straight, I was nothing more than a financial convenience. The daughter who once made me paper crowns for Father's Day now saw me as an ATM with an expiration date. For most of my adult life, I believed that family meant unconditional love and mutual respect. That morning, staring at that gleaming BMW in the driveway while clutching a past-due mortgage notice, I learned how wrong I'd been. The paper felt heavy in my weathered hands, hands that had worked construction for 30 years to give Sophia every opportunity I never had. Those same hands were now shaking as I finally understood the truth. I wasn't living with family. I was funding strangers who happened to share my DNA. The morning started like any other Sunday in our routine of careful politeness. I'd been staying in the guest room of the house I'd helped purchase, tiptoeing around like a visitor who'd overstayed his welcome. 9 months earlier, when Sophia tearfully explained she needed help with the down payment, I'd liquidated everything. My retirement savings, my paid-off house in the suburbs, even my late wife Margaret's jewelry collection. All of it went towards securing her dream home with her husband Cameron. $380,000. That's what I'd invested in what I thought was our family's future. The sale of my house, the cashing out of my 401 Kelvin, the liquidation of bonds I'd been saving for retirement travel, everything Margaret and I had worked for went into their down payment. It's temporary, Dad Sophia had promised through tears that seemed so genuine. Just until we get established, we'll be a real family again. The first few weeks had felt like the family reunion I'd dreamed of since Margaret's death. Sophia would ask about my day, Cameron would discuss current events over dinner, and for brief moments I felt like I belonged somewhere again. We'd watch movies together, share stories, laugh over old photo albums. I thought I'd found my place in the world again after 2 years of rattling around that empty house where every corner held memories of Margaret. But family warmth, I learned, can evaporate faster than morning dew when it's built on financial dependency rather than genuine affection. The changes came gradually, so slowly that I almost didn't notice the shift from guest to burden. First, it was subtle suggestions about my daily routine. Dad, maybe you could run errands in the afternoon when we're at work. The house gets so busy in the morning. Then it was gentle corrections about my living habits. Could you maybe eat breakfast a little later? Cameron likes the kitchen quiet during his morning calls. By Christmas, our nightly dinners had become my solitary meals in the kitchen while they ate in the dining room. We've been eating earlier, Sophia would explain when I asked. Didn't want to disrupt your evening reading time. But I could hear their conversations through the thin walls, their laughter mixing with the clink of good china I wasn't invited to use. By February, I was contributing $2,600 monthly toward their mortgage from my construction pension. The request had come during another tearful conversation in the kitchen. Dad, I hate to ask, but the adjustable rate mortgage jumped higher than we expected. Could you help with payments until Cameron's commission checks improve? The amount represented nearly my entire monthly income, leaving me with barely enough for personal expenses. By April, I was walking on eggshells in my own former home, trying not to breathe too loudly or exist too visibly. My morning coffee had to be made before 6 a.m. to avoid conflicting with Cameron's breakfast routine. My television viewing was restricted to the small set in my room to avoid disturbing their evening relaxation. Even my shower schedule was dictated by their preferences and professional obligations. The transformation had been so gradual that I'd almost convinced myself it was normal. Almost. But Father's Day has a way of clarifying relationships, doesn't it? Watching Sophia present those BMW keys to Cameron's father, Victor, with such theatrical joy while dismissing my existence entirely. That moment crystallized everything. I wasn't a father being honored. I was a tenant being tolerated. The difference between being needed and being used had never been more obvious. The first sign something was fundamentally wrong came 3 weeks before that devastating Father's Day. I'd been reviewing my bank statements at the kitchen table when Sophia breezed through, chatting animatedly on her phone about vacation plans. Tahoe will be perfect in July, she was saying. The cabin rental is only $4,000 for the week, and with Dad covering the mortgage, we can totally afford to splurge on the kids' summer activities. I froze. The casual way she discussed my financial contributions while planning luxuries I couldn't afford myself felt like ice water in my veins. When had my help become an entitlement? When had my sacrifice become their budget line item? I'd been working part-time at Home Depot to supplement my pension, bringing home barely enough to cover my personal expenses while they planned vacations funded by my mortgage payments. $4,000 for 1 week. That represented more than my monthly take-home pay, yet here was my daughter discussing it like pocket change. Meanwhile, I was buying generic cereal and walking to the store to save gas money. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I was subsidizing their leisure while rationing my own necessities. That evening I tried to bring up the topic gently. Sophia, honey, I heard you mentioning vacation plans. Are things getting better financially? Her response was swift and sharp. Dad, we've talked about this. You agreed to help temporarily until we stabilized. Don't start micromanaging our decisions now. The word temporarily hung in the air like a question mark. 9 months felt far from temporary, especially when no end date had ever been discussed. The second red flag appeared during a neighborhood barbecue 2 weeks later. I'd been chatting with the Hendersons next door when Mrs. Henderson made an innocent comment that stopped my heart. It's so wonderful how Sophia takes care of you, Harold. She was telling us about the challenges of caring for aging parents and how much it costs to keep elderly family members comfortable. Aging parents. Elderly family members. The words echoed in my head for hours. At 56, I was hardly elderly, but apparently that's how Sophia had been presenting me to the neighbors. Not as her father who'd sacrificed everything to help her succeed, but as a burden she was nobly shouldering. The narrative she'd constructed painted her as the selfless daughter managing a difficult parent, rather than the beneficiary of ongoing financial support. Mrs. Henderson continued oblivious to my shock. She mentioned how expensive senior care has become and how much more affordable it is to keep family at home. You're so lucky to have such a devoted daughter. The irony was suffocating. Sophia was receiving social credit for caring for me while I was the one providing financial care for her. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of what had once been a guest room but now felt more like a cell. The house creaked and settled around me, and I could hear Sophia and Cameron's muffled conversations through the thin walls. Their voices carried easily when they were discussing their plans, their futures, their dreams, all built on the foundation of my dissolved life savings and ongoing payments. I started paying closer attention after that, watching the patterns I'd been too trusting to notice before. Cameron's expensive craft beer in the refrigerator, $20 six-packs that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Sophia's weekly nail appointments and monthly shopping trips to high-end boutiques. The premium cable package, with every sports and movie channel available. The organic groceries and restaurant-quality meals they prepared for themselves, while I subsisted on discount lunch meat and day-old bread. They lived like people with disposable income, while I lived like someone rationing resources. The irony was suffocating. My pension and part-time wages were funding their middle-class lifestyle while I existed at near-poverty levels in their home. They were comfortable because I was not. They could afford luxuries because I could not. The third warning sign came when I accidentally discovered printouts in Cameron's home office. I'd gone upstairs to fix a loose doorknob, old habits from my construction days, when I noticed documents scattered on his desk. Elder care facility brochures, assisted living cost comparisons, memory care options. A handwritten note in Sophia's writing, Dad's situation, timeline for transition, maximize current arrangement. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. They weren't planning to care for me indefinitely. They were planning to warehouse me once my usefulness expired. The brochures detailed facilities with shared rooms and basic amenities, the kind of places where people go to wait for death rather than live with dignity. All while I was funding the lifestyle that would eventually afford them the luxury of disposing of me conveniently. I photographed those documents with shaking hands, though I wasn't sure why at the time. Some instinct told me I'd need evidence of their intentions, proof that my growing suspicions weren't just paranoia or hurt feelings. The timeline mentioned 18 months. Apparently that's how long they calculated they could extract mortgage payments before moving me to more appropriate housing. Standing in that home office, surrounded by evidence of their calculated betrayal, I felt something die inside me. Not hope. I'd lost that months ago. What died was the last vestige of denial, the final thread of belief, that my daughter might still love me as more than a funding source. The family I'd thought I was helping rebuild had never existed. I'd been participating in my own financial execution, and they'd been counting down the days until they could flip the switch. The most devastating discovery came completely by accident the Friday before Father's Day. I'd been taking out the trash when the wind caught some papers from Cameron's car, scattering them across the driveway. As I gathered them up, one document made me stop breathing entirely. It was a loan application for the BMW dated 3 weeks earlier. In the section requesting monthly income, they'd listed my mortgage contributions as part of their household earnings. They'd used my payments to qualify for a $90,000 car loan. My sacrifice had become their credit enhancement. My financial support had been leveraged to fund a luxury I'd never be allowed to enjoy. The BMW sitting in the driveway wasn't just a gift for Victor. It was a monument to my exploitation, purchased with my unknowing assistance and my unwitting financial guarantee. The loan paperwork revealed other disturbing details. They'd inflated their own income figures by 30%. Cameron had listed his real estate commissions as salary rather than the sporadic payments they actually were. Sophia had claimed her part-time marketing role paid significantly more than her actual wages. But most shocking was seeing my monthly contributions listed as family support income, with no mention that it came from my pension and part-time earnings. I photographed everything before the wind could scatter it further. Bank statements showing their actual income versus what they'd claimed. Credit card bills revealing thousands in luxury purchases made in the months following my move-in. Travel receipts from weekend getaways I'd never been told about. A restaurant charge for $300 on a Tuesday night when they told me they were working late and I'd eaten alone. That night I called my old friend Pete from the construction crew. We'd worked together for 15 years before I'd sold everything to help Sophia. Pete, I said, I think I've made a terrible mistake. The conversation that followed opened my eyes to possibilities I'd been too emotionally invested to consider. Pete had experience with financial elder abuse through his work with a senior advocacy group. His questions were direct and uncomfortable, but they forced me to confront the reality I'd been avoiding. Harold, think about it, Pete said. You sold your house to give them money. You pay their mortgage. You work part-time to support yourself while they live comfortably. They're making plans to put you in a facility. That's not family care, that's financial exploitation. The words felt foreign applied to my situation, but they fit like a key in a lock I'd been afraid to examine. Pete connected me with a legal aid attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases. Mr. Whitman attorney Sarah Chen said during our phone consultation, what you're describing follows a textbook pattern. Adult children convince elderly parents to liquidate assets, then systematically exploit their ongoing resources while planning eventual abandonment. It's more common than you'd think, especially in families dealing with economic pressure. By Saturday night, I knew what I was looking at. Systematic financial exploitation disguised as family obligation, identity theft through unauthorized use of my financial information, emotional manipulation designed to maintain access to my resources while minimizing my humanity. The technical terms felt strange applied to my family situation, but they fit like clothing that had been tailored specifically for my circumstances. The attorney explained my options. I could file complaints with Adult Protective Services. I could pursue civil litigation for financial abuse. I could report the loan fraud to federal banking authorities. I could terminate my financial support immediately and force them to face the consequences of their actual income levels. The choices felt overwhelming after months of having no choices at all. Sunday morning arrived with Father's Day expectations I should have known better than to harbor. But hope dies hard, even when it's built on evidence to the contrary. I dressed carefully that Sunday morning, choosing my best shirt and taking time with my appearance. If this was going to be a day of reckoning, I wanted to face it with whatever dignity I had left. The smell of breakfast drifted upstairs, and for a moment I allowed myself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, they'd remember that I was a father worthy of recognition too. The scene downstairs shattered those illusions like glass hitting concrete. The dining room had been transformed into a celebration space, but the celebration wasn't for me. Fresh flowers, expensive orchids and roses that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Imported champagne cooling in a silver bucket I'd never seen before. Wrapped gifts arranged artfully around a chair positioned to face the window overlooking the driveway. Victor's chair, not mine. I might as well have been invisible furniture for all the acknowledgement I received. "Good morning, Dad," Sophia said, without looking up from her elaborate table arrangements. The greeting carried the same perfunctory tone she'd used for months, the kind of acknowledgement you'd give a delivery person or maintenance worker. Cameron emerged from the kitchen carrying a crystal vase, his face bright with anticipation for the day's festivities. Neither of them seemed to notice or care that their celebration excluded the only actual father living in the house. When Victor arrived at precisely 10 a.m., the transformation was immediate and complete. Sophia embraced him with genuine warmth, the kind of physical affection I hadn't received in months. "Happy Father's Day!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying an enthusiasm I'd almost forgotten she possessed. Cameron shook his father's hand with obvious pride, already reaching for his phone to document the surprise they'd planned. The presentation of the BMW keys was choreographed like a theater performance. Sophia delivered a speech about Victor's unwavering support and guidance, while Cameron filmed everything for social media. Victor's gracious surprise seemed perfectly rehearsed, his protests about the expense delivered with just the right amount of humility. I stood in the background like a stagehand, watching my daughter celebrate a father who wasn't me with money that essentially came from my liquidated life. "This is too much," Victor protested, though his smile suggested otherwise. "I can't accept something so expensive." His words were delivered for the camera's part of the script they'd all agreed to follow. The BMW represented more than transportation matter. It was a symbol of their success, their ability to afford extravagant gestures, their arrival in the financial stratosphere where $90,000 gifts were possible. "Nonsense," Sophia replied, her voice ringing with theatrical generosity. "You've been like a real father to me. You deserve something special." The words landed like a physical blow. Like a real father. As opposed to what? The man who'd raised her alone after Margaret died, the man who'd worked double shifts to pay for her college education, the man who'd sold his home and emptied his retirement accounts to fund her dreams. When that gleaming BMW was revealed, when Sophia presented those keys with such theatrical joy, when Victor was embraced and celebrated while I stood forgotten in the background, that's when the last piece of my denial crumbled into dust. The daughter who'd once drawn pictures of us as superheroes now saw her real father as less worthy of recognition than a man she'd known for 3 years. The moment stretched like a scene from a movie I didn't want to be in, Sophia beaming with pride at her grand gesture, Cameron capturing every angle for their social media followers, Victor expressing perfectly calibrated gratitude, and me standing there like a ghost at my own funeral, invisible and irrelevant to the people I'd sacrificed everything to help. Don't I deserve even a small gift? The question escaped before I could stop it, quiet and dignified despite the pain behind it. The silence that followed felt eternal. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance, as if I'd interrupted a private party I had no right to attend. Sophia's response was delivered with the cold efficiency of someone swatting away an insect. "You already live here for free, Dad. That's your gift." The words hung in the air like a verdict. 28 years of single parenthood, of sacrifice and unconditional love, reduced to the status of charity case. I wasn't a father being honored on Father's Day. I was a dependent being reminded of my place. I nodded, once absorbing the finality of that moment, then walked upstairs to pack. There was nothing left to say, no argument that could bridge the gap between what I'd believed about our relationship and what it actually was. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is the dignity of silence. Sometimes walking away is the only way to preserve whatever pieces of yourself remain intact. My packing was methodical and quiet. Clothes folded carefully into the same suitcases I'd brought 9 months earlier, now understanding that I'd never really unpacked emotionally anyway. The few personal items I'd been allowed to display. A photo of Margaret, my construction awards, the watch she'd given me for our 20th anniversary. Everything fit into 2 bags. A stark reminder of how small my life had become in their house. I left behind the expensive Father's Day gifts Sophia had given me over the years, understanding now that they'd been performance pieces rather than genuine expressions of love. The cashmere sweater I'd never worn because it felt too fancy for my diminished circumstances. The leather wallet that had seemed extravagant when money was tight. The watch from last Christmas that had felt more like obligation than affection. All of it remained on the dresser like artifacts of a relationship that had never been as real as I'd believed. The note I left was brief and direct: "I've gone to stay elsewhere. Stop the mortgage payments immediately. We'll discuss the financial arrangements through attorneys. Harold." No explanations, no accusations, no appeals for understanding. Just the facts delivered with the same emotional distance they'd shown me for months. If they wanted to treat our relationship as a business arrangement, I'd respond accordingly. 3 days later, sitting in my extended stay hotel room, I realized that leaving had been the first free choice I'd made in 9 months. My phone buzzed constantly with increasingly frantic messages from Sophia, but I wasn't ready to engage. The messages progressed from confused to angry to desperate, as the reality of their financial situation became clear without my contributions. "Dad, where are you? We need to talk. This is ridiculous. Come home so we can work this out. You're being childish and hurting the whole family. Dad, please call me back. I'm worried about you." The evolution of her tone told the story better than any explanation could. First dismissal, then anger, then panic as she realized the consequences of losing their primary funding source. For the first time since Margaret's death, I was alone by choice rather than circumstance, and the difference felt like breathing again after nearly drowning. The hotel room was small but mine. The television remote stayed where I left it. The thermostat was set to my preference. The coffee was made when I wanted it, not when someone else's schedule allowed. Simple freedoms I'd forgotten existed. The investigation started with a single phone call to Legal Aid's elder abuse hotline. "Mr. Whitman," the intake counselor, said, "what you're describing isn't just family dysfunction. This sounds like systematic financial exploitation. You may have legal options you haven't considered." Those words opened a door I didn't know existed, revealing possibilities for justice I'd never imagined. Attorney Sarah Chen reviewed my documentation with the methodical thoroughness of someone who'd seen this pattern before. The photographs of their planning documents, the loan applications using my income, the evidence of their actual spending versus their claimed financial struggles, the timeline for my planned disposal. Everything pointed toward a clear case of elder financial abuse. "Mr. Whitman, you have several options," she explained. "We can file complaints with Adult Protective Services for financial exploitation. We can pursue civil litigation for the fraudulent use of your financial information. We can report the loan fraud to banking authorities. Most importantly, we can help you recover the assets they've misappropriated." Within a week, I had a legal advocate, a case number, and access to resources I'd never known were available. The evidence I'd photographed, the documents I'd discovered, the financial records I'd meticulously maintained, everything pointed toward a clear pattern of elder abuse. My situation wasn't unique or hopeless. It was recognizable, actionable, and ultimately prosecutable. The first legal notice arrived at their house on a Thursday afternoon. A cease and desist letter demanding they stop using my financial information for credit applications. A formal notification that my financial support was permanently terminated. A warning that any attempt to contact me outside of legal channels would be considered harassment. Sophia's response was immediate and predictable. Angry voicemails accusing me of destroying the family over money. Tearful messages claiming I was abandoning them in their time of need. The next 3 months unfolded like a masterclass in consequences. Sophia and Cameron's financial house of cards collapsed without my mortgage payments, revealing the true instability they'd been hiding behind my subsidies. The BMW was repossessed when they couldn't make payments without my contributions counting as household income. The house went into foreclosure when their actual earnings proved insufficient to support their lifestyle. Their carefully constructed facade crumbled like sand in the rain. The legal proceedings moved quickly once the evidence was presented. Adult Protective Services launched an investigation into financial elder abuse. The banking authorities flagged their loan applications for fraud. The district attorney's office opened a criminal case based on identity theft and financial exploitation. Each agency I'd contacted had seen these patterns before and knew exactly how to respond. But the most satisfying moment came when the district attorney filed formal charges. I sat in the courthouse lobby watching Sophia and Cameron arrive with their attorney, their faces pale, with the reality of facing criminal consequences for their actions. Sophia's tears in that setting couldn't erase 9 months of calculated exploitation. Cameron's excuses about financial pressure couldn't justify identity theft. Their shock at facing accountability would have been amusing if it weren't so pathetic. The arraignment was surreal. Watching my daughter stand before a judge to answer charges of elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy felt like a scene from someone else's life. The prosecutor read the charges in matter-of-fact tones: systematic financial exploitation, fraudulent use of elderly persons' assets, identity theft for financial gain. Each count carried potential jail time and mandatory restitution. Their attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive father seeking revenge for family disagreements, but the evidence spoke louder than emotional appeals. The documented timeline for my planned institutionalization, the loan applications using my income without permission, the proof of their luxury spending while claiming financial hardship. The pattern was too clear and too well documented to dismiss as family drama. The investigation revealed even more than I'd suspected. They'd opened credit cards in my name, making purchases I'd never authorized. They'd claimed me as a dependent on their tax returns to reduce their liability while simultaneously planning to abandon me. They'd researched guardianship laws to explore taking legal control of my remaining assets. The scope of their planning was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. The plea bargaining process took 6 weeks. Cameron folded, first agreeing to testify against Sophia in exchange for reduced charges. His statement revealed the full extent of their scheme. They'd planned everything from the beginning, viewing my move-in as a business opportunity rather than family reunion. The BMW purchase had been timed specifically to coincide with Father's Day, maximizing the emotional impact of their betrayal. Sophia held out longer, her attorney arguing for family counseling rather than criminal prosecution. But the evidence was overwhelming, and eventually she accepted a plea deal: 2 years probation, community service at a senior center, mandatory financial counseling, and full restitution. The irony of her community service assignment wasn't lost on anyone. She'd be learning to care for elderly people while rebuilding trust with the elderly father she'd abused. The restitution phase was particularly satisfying. Their assets were liquidated to repay my losses. The house sold to cover the fraudulent down payment. Cameron's real estate business dissolved to pay legal fees. Their luxury purchases seized and auctioned. Everything they'd gained through my exploitation was returned to me with interest and penalties added by the court. 6 months after that devastating Father's Day, I was living in a small apartment I could afford, working part-time because I wanted to rather than because I had to, and sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. The settlement from their asset liquidation had restored most of my losses. More importantly, I'd restored my sense of self-worth. The apartment wasn't much. A 1-bedroom unit in a quiet complex where neighbors minded their own business while remaining friendly. But it was mine. The lease was in my name, the utilities were my responsibility, and every decision about how to live was mine to make. After 9 months of existing at someone else's pleasure, the simple autonomy of choosing my own breakfast time felt revolutionary. Pete helped me move in, bringing pizza and beer like we were 25 again instead of pushing 60. "You did the right thing, Harold," he said as we assembled my second-hand furniture. "Nobody should have to live like that, especially not with their own family." His validation meant more than any legal victory could. Sophia eventually reached out, of course. Probation requirements, mandated family counseling, and her community service at a senior center had apparently given her perspective on how elderly people should be treated. Our conversations were stilted and careful, filtered through the reality of what she'd done and the consequences she'd faced. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't rebuild quickly or easily. "I don't understand how I became someone who could hurt you like that," she said during one supervised visit at the family counseling center. The words sounded genuine, but time would tell whether they represented real change or strategic remorse. Forgiveness, I'd learned, was a process rather than a decision, and it required evidence of transformation rather than just expressions of regret. The counselor, Dr. Patricia Williams, specialized in family financial abuse cases and had seen every variation of manipulation and recovery. "Harold, you're under no obligation to forgive or reconnect," she reminded me during private sessions. "Your healing doesn't depend on Sophia's redemption. Your priority should be protecting yourself and rebuilding your life on terms that serve your well-being." Slowly, carefully, I began to construct a life that belonged entirely to me. I returned to Home Depot part-time, not because I needed the money for survival, but because I enjoyed the work and the camaraderie with colleagues who treated me as a skilled professional rather than a burden to be managed. My supervisor, knowing my situation, offered me additional responsibilities, training new employees in construction techniques. I joined a senior hiking group despite being younger than most members and discovered the joy of exploring Arizona's desert trails without worrying about anyone else's schedule or preferences. Saturday mornings became my time for solitary adventures, climbing mountains and photographing sunrises with a camera I'd bought for myself without consulting anyone else's budget. The financial counseling mandated by the court settlement taught me things I wished I'd known 9 months earlier. How to recognize financial manipulation, how to maintain asset protection when helping family members, how to distinguish between genuine need and manufactured crisis. The education felt like a vaccination against future exploitation. Most importantly, I learned to value my own company again. Evenings alone in my apartment weren't lonely. They were peaceful. Meals prepared for one person weren't sad. They were exactly what I wanted to eat when I wanted to eat it. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities I could choose, without negotiating with anyone else's agenda. Cameron disappeared entirely after the legal proceedings, apparently relocating to another state where his family's connections might provide some protection from the social consequences of his crimes. Sophia mentioned during one counseling session that he'd blamed her for getting caught rather than taking responsibility for his role in the exploitation. Some people, it seemed, never learned the difference between consequence and victimization. The community service requirement was transforming Sophia in ways that jail time probably wouldn't have. Working directly with elderly residents at an assisted living facility, she was witnessing firsthand how seniors should be treated with respect, dignity, and genuine care rather than calculated tolerance. Her weekly reports to the probation officer documented a growing understanding of what she'd taken from me. The residents here have children who visit regularly, she told me during one counseling session. They bring grandchildren for holidays. They ask about medical appointments. They treat their parents like people whose opinions matter. Watching them made me realize what I threw away for money that didn't even make us happy. The healing wasn't linear or guaranteed. Some days Sophia seemed genuinely remorseful and committed to change. Other days I could see flashes of the entitlement and manipulation that had characterized her behavior during the worst period of our relationship. Trust, I was learning, had to be rebuilt slowly with actions rather than words, over years rather than months. Today, 18 months after that devastating Father's Day, I can say that losing my family was the price of finding myself. The man who'd allowed himself to be reduced to a funding source had rediscovered his worth as a human being. The father who'd enabled exploitation had learned the difference between love and manipulation. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the natural consequences of their choices. Would I have done anything differently? Probably not. The alternative was continuing to subsidize my own dehumanization while they planned my disposal. Sometimes walking away is the only way to preserve whatever dignity you have left. Sometimes silence speaks louder than arguments. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones you need to protect yourself from. If you've ever felt exploited by family members who mistake your generosity for obligation, if you've ever wondered whether you're being used rather than loved, if you've ever had to choose between keeping peace and demanding respect, you're not alone. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Seek help. You deserve better than being treated like a resource to be managed, rather than a person to be cherished. Do you think I went too far, or should I have acted sooner? Have you ever experienced similar family exploitation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to value themselves enough to demand better treatment. And if this resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with others who might need to hear